Hello and welcome. This is Chase Morrison with Profitwyse. What you're looking at here is our manufacturing P&L template. Now, this isn't going to be the end-all be-all solution that you probably need, but it will significantly provide a helpful structure that you can customize to fit your requirements, or at least look at the formulas and then develop your own model. But I have used this template or similar ones to set up very complex manufacturing plans. So really this is the bones of what you need to get to a P&L solution. The template consists of 8 worksheets, the first 6 addressing different aspects of a plan, and the last 2 showing how monthly results might be analyzed in a fictitious month. First off, on the top half, let's look at the planned revenue. Now, we've got 5 products in our business model here that we're using to come up with our whole production plans. Obviously, that may or may not work for you. I assume you'll have more than that. But most of this would be typically provided by the marketing department because they would be providing what the ASPs or average sales prices are going to be and what they expect the volume projections to be. So here, if you look at this first product here in January, you can see that the ASP per unit is $3.75. And then we've plugged in the units here, and then we're calculating out the revenue. Now that may or may not be the way that you want to do this. For example, you may put in what the revenue is and the ASP and back into the units. So you have to decide what works best for you. But that's typically the way that a marketing department would provide information that I've experienced historically. So the bottom half of this is the units and hours required in our build plan. So this is going to be more of a cost accounting exercise. But basically, we are taking the units sold, and then that's just dropping down here onto row 33. And in here, we've put in what our yield factor means. So we're saying here that we're going to have a 5% loss. Consequently, since we're going to have a 5% loss, then we have to yield up our start quantities. So that's what the start quantity is, just dividing the units sold by the build quantity. And then here we have the per unit labor standard. So this says it's going to be 0.0130 of an hour. And then we're just multiplying our starts by that standard to get the number of hours that we're going to have for this product in that 1 month. So if you scroll down, you can see some of these. There's a 95% yield, a 75% yield. So we're breaking this down so that we can adjust the yield accordingly. And then down here we summarize everything and come up with a weighted average yield for everything with all our starts, average per unit labor, and then this is the total hours. So we're going to need 5,000 direct labor hours to start the number of units that we have in here. And then over here at the right, you can see that we're going to need about 57,000 hours for the entire year of direct labor. Okay, now that we know that we need 57,000 hours of labor, we can go over to our headcount plan and start to figure out how we're going to calculate headcount. Now, again, the top half of this is showing you how you might do this for a typical work center. So you start out with the calendar days for the year. This must have been a leap year because there's 366 days. Then we come up with what the weekdays are. Then we have our holidays because we're going to subtract the holidays out of our total weekdays. So we have now 254 weekdays that we're going to have, and then we multiply those number of weekdays times 8 hours a day. And then that gives us the gross number of hours that we think that employees are available to work before adjusting for vacations and sick leave where people would be out of the office. So now we begin next at row 13. We subtract out 2.5 weeks for our prototypical employee here, which would be about 100 hours a year. And then we have a average sick time that we expect of 4 days a year, or another 32 hours that we're going to subtract out. So this tells us on a straight time basis that the average employee is going to be available for work 1,900 hours. Then we know that some of our employees are going to be working overtime, so we guesstimate that we're going to have 8% of overtime. So then that gets us to how many hours we have for an employee to be available to work on manufacturing, which is a little over 2,000 hours a year. Now, we have our head count here, which is going to be 25 employees, and we'll get into where that comes from in a minute. So then 25 times the number of available hours tells us the total available hours for production work. Now, you remember in the previous screen, we came up with 57,000 hours that we needed to produce the build plan, and we're going to have a shortfall, obviously, when 25 times 2,000 is 51,000, and we have 56,000, we have about 5,000 hours shortfall. So we're going to assume that we can bring in contract labor just on any monthly basis to come in and fill that need. Now, that may or may not work for you, but that is what we're assuming here to come up with the labor plan. All right, well, now that we have the basic headcount plan, now we want to figure out what the direct labor rate is going to be. So we click over here and again use this many times, this format, to come up with the direct labor rate should be for any work center. So here we have a work center that has 25 employees, and I haven't listed them all, but you can see here's their current salaries. And we're assuming we've got a 20,000 or 2,080 hour year, and then here's their base salary. So for the 25 employees, they're going to get 52,000 hours of straight time, and that's going to be $952,000. So here we can kind of figure out what their current hourly average rate is, okay? And then what we want to do is we want to assume, well, on average, that's the rate, 1831, and that would be 38,000 is the average straight time labor or wages for one of our direct labor employees. And we're going to assume that for this coming year, we're going to give them all a 5% salary increase. So that gets us to $19.23 an hour, and then we can increase our wages, our straight time wages, to just under 40,000. Okay, so now we kind of want to get into figuring out how many hours the employees are going to be available to work. So remember, this is the prototypical employee, so we're going to take out 100 hours for vacation. We're going to take out 64 hours for paid holidays, 32 hours for anticipated sick time. So then that means we have them on a straight time basis. We expect them to be at the office 1,884 hours. And then again, we're going to add in our 8% of overtime. So 8% times 1,884 is another 151 hours. And then this is going to go out at time and a half. So we're going to take our straight time rate, multiply times 1.5, and then 1.5 times 1923 is going to be this $4,346 of overtime pay. So their pay, their straight time pay plus their overtime pay should be around $44,000. So next we want to include some of their payroll related expenses, because we want this labor rate to fully absorb their payroll taxes as well as their health insurance. Now, you may have more stuff in here. You may have 401k matching estimates or life insurance or, whatever it is. But, if you want a rate that is fully absorbing all their related payroll expenses, this is how you do it. So we take the $44,336 and then we add in these two estimates for their payroll taxes and health insurance. So the average employee is going to cost us a little under $58,000 for the year. And then we think that they're going to be available to work direct labor 2,035 hours. So 58,000 divided by 2035 is 2847. So this is very important. This is going to be the direct labor rate that we're going to use for all our standard product costing moving forward. Okay, with that to calculate it, we're going to return over here to the Headcount Plan Worksheet, and we're going to go down here. We're going to calculate out what our total production costs are. So we have the straight time, which is going to be our estimate of straight time hours, and then our overtime hours times our overhead rate to get to our total payroll. And you can go through these calculations as to how I'm calculating the straight time labor costs and the overtime costs. Then here we have our payroll expenses, as we've indicated, the Social Security, Medicare, insurance. So here's our total payroll costs. So our direct labor payroll cost is going to be about $1.5 million. And then we have contract labor, about another $192,000 of contract labor, which means our direct labor is going to be around $1.6 million. Then we calculate out the direct material. So here we're going to be multiplying our starts times a per unit direct material cost. Now the direct material costs are referenced over here in the COGS variance spreadsheet towards the top on the right. So here's our 5 products, and then you can see here's our direct material costs. Now the assumption is that you'd be getting these from manufacturing, engineering, or someplace, but these are the costs, whether you may have a material overhead burden or not, but in this situation we're not really creating any kind of material overhead burden. So back to the headcount sheet, that's where the direct material costs are coming from. So we have about $6.9 million in direct material costs. Then overhead expense, we're layering in an overhead expense. We have a overhead plan worksheet here, and this is just a pretty simple example, but this would just be a one department overhead plan. So you can see some of the categories that we'd expect to see in here, like materials and supplies that are overhead-ish, and they're not direct material supplies, packaging, facilities, equipment expense, et cetera, et cetera. So that flows in here in line 41. So then you can see the overhead cost was $1.7 million. So if we add up our total costs, you can see we get to $10.2 million total production costs. Now that's kind of the final piece of the puzzle that we need to start calculating out more pieces of our P&L. So we're going to move over here to this COGS and variance plan spreadsheet. Now we want to start down here at the bottom. Down here at the bottom, you'll want to drill into this, but here we show you how we're going to get to the scrap and yield unit cost, kind of our labor variance hours cost, direct material scrap costs, and our overhead absorption costs. So you'll want to look at each one of those individually. And then going up to the top, we have our cost of goods. So once again, over here, we summarize. We got our direct labor, which came from manufacturing engineering. We computed what the labor cost is going to be using our labor rate. And then we got our overhead costs. And then we have our material costs. And now over here, we have our standard costs or average costs, however you're going to be calculating them, that we're going to apply over here on this cost of goods plan. So this is just taking, for each product, is taking the unit shipped times the unit cost to come up with what the cost of goods is for each one of these items. And then finally, we can come down here and we can calculate out what our gross profit is going to be just by subtracting the revenue, which was on that first revenue plan sheet, minus the cost of goods. And then this is telling us what our anticipated margins are. So this is where you would want to spend some time trying to figure out, is 2.9 million in, or I should say, is 7.7 million in gross profit going to be enough to fund all the operating expenses that we need to run the business? And then you can start tweaking different assumptions, coming up with tasking for labor costs and direct material costs, and do different decisions about overhead. Then lastly, this all gets put together on this fifth worksheet over here on the P&L, so you can kind of look at where all these numbers are coming from. I put in an estimate for discounts and allowances, but all these other numbers, you can see where they're being computed over on the other page, and this would be your new year plan. And then over at the right, there's a reconciliation. I think there's a little bit of a difference, about $90K, that I didn't quite reconcile in total. Now, the last two worksheets just show you how you would come up with, say, what the different labor variances would be in a prototypical month and how that gets calculated, and also where all the overhead, absorption, and spend variances come from and how they're calculated, just as an example, so you can see how you would analyze this on a monthly basis. So hopefully you found that useful. If you want to get a copy, let us know, or click the link where you'll get a copy of it. There's also a link down below in the description where you can get a copy of this as well. And thank you for your attention, and hope to talk to you soon.